Hi, welcome to session 5 of Sowing Seeds of Climate Hope. And I hope you've seen by the previous 4 sessions, this is real. There are real reasons to believe in the hope for the future for our kids and our grandkids if we seize upon these opportunities that we're showing in these videos. Today we're going to talk about Earth life systems. When God made God's good creation, God put everything in delicate, interrelated balance. And so life systems, how they relate to each other, is very critical. So the first video we're going to plunge into is protecting our forests, because forests, well, they actually give us oxygen and they take away pollution. So we'll see about that. The second one you might not think of when you initially go into it, but it's educating girls, and what a tremendous achievement that is if across the globe we educated girls and what that means in terms of pollution. And we'll get into it. And the third one might be a little bit delicate, but we're going to ask you to engage with us in the very serious discussion of how big should our families be. As the one truth that I told you in the very first video is very startling. In my lifetime, we have tripled the world's population. And so there is no discussion that legitimately addresses the future for our kids without a discussion about family planning. So you might get a tad uncomfortable through some of these, and so I would hope you would take an extended discussion time after the videos to discuss that through, to talk about what touched you, what you agree with, what you disagree with, but also listen to each other and gain from the wisdom of others, and just see if by chance God is speaking through one of you to guide us all this day. Let's get started. You know, one of the amazing things about God's good creation is He gave us sustainable life cycles. And so one example is we breathe in oxygen and we breathe out CO2 pollution. Trees breathe in pollution, they breathe in CO2, and they release oxygen, and they hold the pollution in the leaves and in the stems and in the trunks, and more importantly, in the soil, in the root system, and in the humus. They are absolutely critical to removing the carbon that we put up in the air, because right now we've long exceeded what the trees can do. But we've compounded that. Human civilization has destroyed more than half the forests that are on this earth, right? Particularly in the northern hemisphere, but right now a lot of it is happening across the tropical forests at a disastrous rate. In our history, we have clear-cut forests and realized to our disdain and our woe that when you clear-cut forests, there's nothing that holds the soil in place. And when you don't hold the soil in place and it gets washed away, then you have desert, and so you can't grow food. The major conflict areas in the world right now are often centered in deserts that were once forests. So if you look at Iraq and you look at the Middle East, all of those struggles for resources really are rooted in our abuse of God's good creation. Trees, we love the sun shade that they give us and the coolness that they give us, but more importantly, they also manage the moisture. So trees act as big moisture reservoirs, and so they hold it until we need it. They put it in the ground so that we can grow our crops. But we need to get a lot wiser about our use of them. Project Drawdown tells us that the carbon that is held in the ground and in the trees by the forest is 900 gigatons. And if that were to be released, there's not going to be a future for our kids. So we have to stop all the deforestation that's going on, because we reach this portion of the cycle where we're starting to have positive feedbacks, where we're going faster and faster into destruction. It comes from the planet warming up because of the pollution we put in. And so when the planet warms up, then the winters don't get as cold. And when the winters don't get as cold, the winters don't kill off the insects which destroy the trees. So in the boreal forest, there's billions of trees that have been destroyed just out of the borer bug. When we don't hold in the moisture, then the forests get dry, and then you have more forest fires, which burns the tree, which releases the pollution into the atmosphere. It's another cycle. But even more than that, in our interest in having cheap palm oil and cheap beef, we're clear-cutting forests along the tropics, and we're burning them. And so when we burn them, we release all of that carbon up into the atmosphere, and we increase our pollution. But we also destroy the soil that's holding in the pollution. Project Drawdown tells us that managing that resource, holding that 900 gigatons, and actually improving our forests so they hold more is the #1 possibility for holding off global climate change. Sounds pretty important to do. The good news is we know how to do this. We know how to manage our resources so that we don't destroy old growth forests with all of that carbon they have in it. It takes taking the greed out of this and putting accountability into it. So the international agreements that require companies to only pull from managed reserves in a way, to only purchase palm oil from plantations that already exist rather than new ones that are being burned off, to work sustainably with the earth. Now, some of this requires the rich nations to support the poor nations whose only resource might be those trees. But there are international agreements. There's science and technology to manage this without causing further destruction. In fact, to replant so that the reserves of carbon keep getting sequestered at a greater level into the ground. In fact, this is something you and I can do. Think about it. Next time you take a plane trip, that plane trip puts a lot of carbon dioxide pollution up in the atmosphere. But there are nonprofits, there are charities right now that are willing to plant trees for you to offset that pollution. There's tools online that you can go to, carbon footprints and other tools, that can let you calculate just how much pollution you put up. And then the nonprofits, with a little bit of a donation from you, will plant trees sufficient to offset that. So we can still have a modern life within boundaries that respect God's good creation and allow sustainability for the future. You know, in the book of Genesis, in the 2nd chapter, we have the creation story once again told. And this time the poet, in the 2nd chapter, in verses 7 through 9, described God planting a garden in Eden, where he put humankind to care and tend for it, and there he planted trees. Trees of knowledge, trees of life. Maybe the most important thing for us to understand is our knowledge on how to care for creation that will ensure that we have a life, both now and in the future for our kids. We can do this. We can save 900 gigatons of carbon, tremendous amount. We need to keep that in the soil. We need to get about replanting trees and forests. We need to manage them. We need to have international cooperation. We need to remove greed from this equation and restore life. We can do this when we allow our faith to inform our technology. Today, I want to talk about education. Specifically, I want to talk about educating girls. And we chose this backdrop of a brand new school in a low-income neighborhood as a sign of hope when we invest in our kids, when we provide them the educational tools, the educational atmosphere, the eagerness to learn. What is possible? You know, in the opening verses of the Gospel of John, Jesus is described as coming into the world as a light that no darkness could overcome. Education is the most brilliant light to overcome the darkness of this earth. There's hundreds of millions of girls that don't have the chance for education right now. And what a waste. 51% of the human population are women. And if we don't have women involved with their minds and their hearts and their souls, we're just cheating ourselves out of answers for this, out of what's possible, what could be saved for future generations. So why don't kids learn? Why don't girls have a chance to go to school? Well, from a very practical basis, a lot of times the families need them at home because the water supply is 5-6 miles away, and the girls are the ones that have to go haul in the water because the boys have to get educated or work on the farm. On a cultural side, there's still a lot of male-dominated views in the world, particularly in different cultures where we say women don't do that, or there's no reason for girls to have education because they're girls. What a waste of God-given talent. Educating girls, providing the opportunities. And so it's multifaceted. And so it isn't simply to build schools, although they're needed. It's to get away from the schools that are for profit basis and get back to their original source. What's the original purpose of schools? It's to create a hunger to learn, a path towards wisdom, a way to improve the world. Okay? And so, besides building schools, we also have to help in the other areas. So that might mean that in a village, in order to educate girls, we've got to have clean water wells so they don't have to walk 5 miles each way for water. Or we need to provide clean cook stoves so that they don't have to go scrounging for wood in a far-off forest. But it might also be that we have to educate and create a culture of learning where women are valued for what they bring into it. You know, I've gone on a number of immersion experiences in Palestine and in Mexico and Colombia and in Honduras, and in every single case, it was women who were providing hope for the future. Women who are rising up and speaking out of their courage, out of their heart, out of the depths of their souls, that another way is possible. That's what we need to solve the climate crisis. From a very practical standpoint, the difference between a woman that's had 0 school education and a woman that's had 12 years of education is a dramatic drop in birth rate. And so it's the most effective birth contraceptive there is. And I'm not talking about sex education, I'm talking simply education. When women are exposed and learn that there are other possibilities, that they can be in control of their lives. It's a difference of 4 or 5 kids versus 1 or 2. It's dramatic. But more importantly, what a terrible waste it would be is if we don't use 51% of the population to solve the crises that are upon us. Let's face it, old white men like me have caused a lot of the problems. We need the wisdom of educated women with their hearts and their minds and their souls, bringing us the answers for how to change human civilization so that our kids, my kids and your kids, have a chance for a future. Can we do this? We can absolutely do this. Why should we do it? In the Gospel of Luke and also in Mark, Jesus describes a story of where he's teaching in a house. And the house is so overflowing, nobody else can get in. And there were some friends that had a buddy that was paralyzed. He was on a pallet. And they tried to get him in the house so Jesus could heal him, and they couldn't access the house. But they didn't give up. Even though there was no way in, they looked up on the roof. And they raised their buddy up on that roof in his pallet. They tore apart the roof, and they lowered the paralyzed man to Jesus so he could get healed. That's what we need to become. We need to become roof rippers instead of wall builders. We need to become those people who dismantle boundaries. You say there's a problem with educating worlds? We can figure out how to do that because we need them as a resource. You say we shouldn't spend money abroad? You're being a fool because that's how terrorism happens. Education is the light that no darkness can overcome. Educating girls unleashes a human talent into this world that God created. How foolish of us not to do it. So at a time when we're cutting off foreign aid, we need to be increasing it. At a time when we want to build walls, we need to be tearing them down. At a time when we don't value women, we should understand the precious resource that they are and lift them up. Educate girls. How stupid are we not to do that? We can do this. My kids and your kids, my grandkids and your grandkids are counting on us to do this. It's within our grasp. We can build brand new schools in all the facilities in low-income areas. We can do it across the globe too. Today, in this episode, I want to do something a little bit different. I want to have a kitchen table conversation. You know what families do when they're facing a deep problem and they don't yet have all the answers for it, but it's important to engage in dialogue on what we might do together to handle this problem. So grab yourself a coffee mug or a tea mug or whatever is your drink of this day. You might want to pause the video while you go do that. And when you're ready, we can start again. Ready? Okay, let's begin. What we want to talk about today is the critical issue of global population. You know, in my lifetime, one of the stunning things that's happened is we've tripled the number of people on this earth. In just one lifetime, we've tripled. That obviously can't keep happening, or the earth won't be able to survive the life systems anyway. And so what can we do about this? Well, this is where we raise the issue of family planning, which is, I'll grant you, often a very emotional subject. And so that's why it's important that we engage in a dialogue about it and where we ponder it, because there is no one right answer. But an answer or answers are very critically needed if future generations are going to have an earth that is friendly towards them rather than cruel. So we need to engage in this discussion. First of all, let's look at what causes the problem. There's a historic equation that comes about that the total impact on the Earth's life systems comes about if you take the number of people times their level of consumption times the technology that they're using. So does the technology aid or assist the destruction of the Earth? Does the level of consumption aid or destroy because it overconsumes? And then the number of people. If you've been following these episodes, we spent a lot of time on the technology part, where we've offered up technologies that are available right now to reduce the impact on the Earth's life systems. We've even talked about reducing the consumption level, what we consume and what we waste. And those are both very critical things. But we'd be less than honest if we didn't also include the people discussion. Because it's the number of people times the level of consumption times the technologies involved that has a total impact on the earth. And that's why it's critical to talk about. So obviously, right from the get-go, we recognize that wealthier societies have a much greater impact on the earth because of our level of consumption and the technologies that we're involved with, right? And so if you look at the chart, you can see that the United States has twice the impact that the average citizen of Europe has, and we've got, 8 times what a person in India has. And so this isn't a problem that we say somebody else has to handle it, some other country has to. It's really a global issue. Right? And it's not an issue that rich people get to dictate to other people, you need to control your family size. No. That's against the human right, a basic human right. Plus, it isn't going to work. It's that obvious. It doesn't work when somebody dictates family size. We can see the trials and tribulations in societies such as China where they've done that, where they've mandated a family size. And that results in a lot of pain and suffering. And it does not need to be that way. Earlier in Project Drawdown, we talked about educating girls and how when you educate girls and they grow up into women, there's a side benefit of there's less children that are populated, because as women find out they have other choices, they will choose voluntarily not to have such a large family size. So Project Drawdown will take the numbers and say half of the effect for reducing global population will simply be derived by educating girls. But the other half is family planning. So family planning by its alone, Project Drawdown rates as number 7 with a huge 60 gigatons of reduction of pollution. And then the other half being part of the girls' education. So it's a huge issue to talk about. But it's also a cultural issue. And so mandating this across cultural lines isn't going to work. It has to be something that's brought about by education and the availability of resources to people who would desire to use them. Surveys have shown there's a couple 100 million women across the globe who do not have access to family planning that express a desire for it. It's such a small percentage of our global outreach as a country that we're woefully lacking in it. But also within our own society. There's a prejudice that we have that the people of the dominant class don't have to worry about such things. It's those other people that have a problem. Is that so? When we discuss in a family, a husband and a wife, on what is the optimum size family they would love to have, do we take into account what kind of future there will be for the children if we don't limit the number of children that there are? I have to confess right up front that my wife and I love having grandchildren. We love having lots of them. But somewhere along the way, we need to say, are we putting too great a load on what the life systems of the earth can handle? Both you and I, as well as people across the globe. So the first part of this is to take this issue into family conversations when you're deciding whether we're going to have that next child or not. And that requires some degree of discomfort. And so do it over a mug of coffee, a mug of tea, and don't do it just once. Make sure that nobody is feeling coerced or pressured. But we're just looking at what kind of future that we want for our children and our grandchildren. And what does it take to provide that future? To enable the Earth's life systems to handle that many people. We obviously can't keep tripling the population. Right now we're at 7.5 billion, on our way up to 10 or 12 billion in the foreseeable future. And that the Earth cannot bear. Certainly not at our current level of consumption. So the first step is education, that this is an issue. And second is the dialogue on what each culture, across that culture, sees as a way to address this issue. Not imposed by another culture or another class or another nation. What does that culture, that subgroup of a particular people, think is the correct answer to this? The next part of this equation is to provide the resources so that they can have access to family planning if they desire, so they can go to doctors that won't be critical of their interest in having family planning, that they have resources that are within their walking area, in their living space that they can use, and that the shame or guilt that might be associated with this is instead replaced by education. There are success stories that have been happening around the globe where voluntary family planning has been offered and the support services are there and women can choose to use them. Families can choose the size that they want to be. And that has had significant effect in reducing the population growth. So can we do this? It's a terribly convoluted, emotional subject for a lot of people. You know, in the book of Genesis, the very first book of the Bible, Abram was mad at God because God had not seen fit yet to grant him an heir, a child, a male child in that culture. And so he argued with God, and God says, you have no faith. Come out here. Look at the stars. Look at all those stars. So many will your descendants be. We've managed to do that. We have populated the earth with about as many people as the stars in our galaxy. It's about time to say, you know, Genesis is poetry, and it wasn't meant that we had to have that many people. Yes, a child is precious, and everyone should be loved and brought into the world delighted that they are there. We can do that with family planning. We can do that with balancing our resources. We can do that with education. We can do that cooperatively, not dictating who has how many, but working together to face a problem, a common problem, a shared problem, that this earth surely has a limit to how many people can be on it. And so what can our education and our support systems do to bring us to a generous response to that critical issue so that our grandkids, my grandkids and your grandkids, have a future that we would really want to have for them? You add in the total effect on increased population, and it's the number one problem that we face in the global climate crisis and the effect that humans are causing. So can we do something about it? Yes, we absolutely can do it. Can we respect each other's cultures and worth as human beings? Absolutely. Does every child have a right to be born into a world that opens their arms to receive them? Absolutely. This is where we need to be having our dialogues and our conversations. There are answers. There are answers that are arrived by people being educated and determining for themselves what's the best future for their child. Can we do this? You bet we can do it. I have every confidence that we can do it and ensure the future for our kids. So we'll see you next time on Come and See, where we won't be having a dining room table conversation. We'll be out looking at something that we can specifically do this day to take action to save the future for our kids. Take care. See you again. Bye-bye.
And faith is not in knowing, it's a willingness to learn. And faith is found in loving when there's nothing in return. So come and see, around the bend, look my friend, and what could be? Come with me, come with me. There's so much more to know, so come and see. There's so much more to know, so come and see.